So welcome to everybody who's just joining us. We're just waiting for everybody to come in before we start the lecture. Hope that you're in a Halloween mood for tonight. So we're delighted to welcome you all to this evening's lecture with Dr. Louise Fenton, Trick and Tourist Treat, Halloween in New Orleans. And we're also thrilled to welcome Louise back and to host another of her fascinating lectures. My name is Paula Harrison and I'm the coordinator of University Centre Telford, and we're hosting tonight's lecture. We're part of the University of Wolverhampton, for those of you who don't know, and we're based in Telford in the heart of Shropshire. We would normally hold our public lecture series in our centre, and in fact this time last year Louise came to the centre to deliver her first Halloween lecture, and the whole centre was lit up and decorated for Halloween, which was amazing. And we're in the Southwater building in Telford, but obviously because of the current pandemic, we've had to move our lectures online. But that's meant that we've had an amazing audience from across the world, particularly for Louise's lectures. So before I introduce Louise formally and hand over to her, just to say that there will be an opportunity to ask Louise questions at the end of the lecture via the Q&A button. And if you're using a laptop or a desktop, the icon is at the bottom of the screen in the middle. And if you're using a mobile, it will be in the top right-hand corner. And just before we start, just to say that Louise is a cultural historian, illustrator and writer. She has a BA and an MA in illustration from the University of Wolverhampton. She completed her PhD on the representations of Voodoo at the University of Warwick in 2010. Louise is now a senior lecturer in contextual studies at the University of Wolverhampton. Her recent research has focused on the visual and literary representations of otherness and the social history of witchcraft, voodoo and zombies. So I'll hand over to Louise now. Thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you, Paula. Hello and welcome to everybody. If you've not attended one of these before, I will say I can't see any of you. So I know I tend to laugh at my own jokes, so I apologise for that in advance. And I can't see if you've got your feet up or your slippers on or how you're sat, so please don't worry about that. Thank you, Paula, and to the University Centre Telford for hosting another of my lectures. I really enjoy doing these and sharing my weird and wonderful research. So as Paula said, my name's Louise Fenton. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton. My background is in art and illustration. I still do a lot of drawing and I use art as research. However, a lot of my research is around representations of Haitian Voodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, witchcraft. I'm particularly interested in curses and cursed objects and haunted dolls and anything paranormal, weird or spooky. If you do want to contact me after the talk, there will be a chance for Q&A, as Paula's just said, but I've put my email address and I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. So if you do want to catch up with me, please do. I'm quite happy to take any questions outside of the lecture time. So tonight, Trick or Tourist Treat, Halloween in New Orleans. I'm going to start by giving a brief history of Halloween. I know some of you would have attended my lecture on Halloween history last week, so this really is just a brief overview to put it into context. I'm then going to look at how Halloween arrived in the USA. That's very brief, and then I'll get into the New Orleans Halloween traditions, looking at the old ones and the new. I will be mentioning ghosts, I will be mentioning voodoo, I will be mentioning all things spooky, so it's Halloween. And I've also got my badges on from New Orleans, my pumpkin and my little voodoo doll, just to make, I tried to get more ambience, but it just wasn't going to work. Okay, so the Halloween of the 31st of October is from Celtic Samhain. It's spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N, but pronounced Samhain. I have seen it pronounced Samhain, but Samhain is the one I shall use tonight. And it's a festival that's been celebrated on the 31st of October for about 2,000 years now. So it's not a new event, and it started here across the areas where Scotland, Ireland, a little part of France, the Isle of Man. So it's that main area where Samhain was really originating from. The Celts were a farming and agricultural people, so the Celtic year was very much determined by the growing seasons. And Samhain represented the end of the summer and the time when the crops were all cut and the cattle were brought down off the hills for slaughter, ready for the long winter. The festival symbolised the boundary between the living and the dead, which I'll talk about a little more in a moment. But these dates are key, that originally on the 1st of May in 609, All Martyrs' Day was established. And that's for all those who have been martyred. And then in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III decided to include saints as well. And the date moved from the 1st of May to the 1st of November. So if you think by this time, Samhain was well established on the pagan calendar, but less so, obviously, with the church. So by the 9th century, Christianity was spreading globally, but especially across Europe. So on 1000 AD, the 2nd of November was then designated as All Souls' Day to honour the dead. So we had on the 31st of October was Samhain, or All Hallows' Eve, which eventually came Halloween. The 1st of November is All Saints' Day. The 2nd of November is All Souls' Day. And it's often quoted that the church attempted to replace the Celtic festival of the dead of Samhain with a church-related sanctified holiday, which was All Saints and All Souls. So they kind of all merged together anyway. So as I said, Celtic Samhain is a festival celebrated on the 1st to 31st of October. It was the end of the summer, so we were going into darkness. And the idea was that on the 31st of October, the veil between the living and the dead was lifted. So the spirits and the ghosts are free to roam. And that means also that not only are they the friendly spirits of those family members or those who have passed before, but evil spirits could come in too. So what they did in many of the villages was to light huge bonfires with a view that that would ward off any evil spirits that were also roaming. And the earliest links to these traditions that we now use for Halloween date back from this time, because for Samhain, costumes were used, but these costumes were not the sort you'd want to wear today. They used animal heads and wrapped themselves in animal skins, again to confuse the ghosts. The idea was to confuse the ghosts. They also told fortunes, believed they could tell each other's fortunes and tried, and people would often leave offerings of food and drink for the spirits. So 2000 years ago, people were wearing costumes, lighting bonfires and offering food and drink. So this is in the UK, not in America. One of the traditions from All Hallows' Eve, Halloween, that sustained was guising or mumming, and this was particularly popular across Scotland and Ireland. The animal heads gave way to a little bit more, I say sedate costumes, but they're actually very eerie costumes. And the idea was that parents would dress up their children in scary disguises, which became guising, and that was to protect them from any evil spirits. So there's a photo on the left, early 20th century, of 3 children dressed in their guises. They would also carry these turnips. They would carve out turnips and put candles inside. And this again reflects back to the bonfires of Samhain and the idea that fire and light would scare away the spirits. So it was a symbol, representative of the bonfires, but that could be carried around on Halloween. Obviously, as time progressed and this went over to the States, these turnips were then replaced by pumpkins, which we know today. At this time as well, this is late 19th, early 20th, children would go door to door and people would give them food as offerings. They didn't ask or threaten to do anything to the people when they knocked the doors. They just went and knocked the doors and people would give offerings, again to placate the spirits, to ward off evil. So it's all starting to take shape at this time. Another tradition are soul cakes. And these are made for Halloween, and souling is another tradition that's a fusion of it's a fusion between the Celtic pagan beliefs and Christian rituals. And it's been often documented as such, and that groups of people would visit local houses, especially the bigger houses, go to farm cottages, and they would sing a request for either apples or soul cakes. And the idea was that if they then were given soul cakes, they would pray for the deceased. So if somebody had died or they wanted to remember a loved one at this time of year, they would have a soul cake and they would pray for them. There are also other traditions associated with souling, such as carrying lanterns, again, that tradition of carrying the pumpkins, dressing in disguise, carrying a horse's head, which thankfully isn't a tradition that's carried on very much, or performing plays. So that's souling. So how did Halloween get to America? European ethnic groups and American Indian traditions and beliefs meshed. Europeans were traveling over to the States from very early, from as early as the 18th, even I think possibly the 17th century. And these groups were carrying, I know that there were some very strong beliefs that it should be forgotten, but the fact that All Souls and All Saints Days was part of the Christian calendar meant that those had come over to America. In the early 19th century, it wasn't celebrated very widespread across America. There were certain states that had started to pick up the traditions, but it was really in the late 19th century, due to a huge influx of immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, that Halloween was popularised. And some of that was due to the potato famine in the late 19th century. So that meant that now we had taken Halloween to America. The tradition of dressing up became very popular. I've just got 2 or 3 slides, which I know some of you would have already seen, but this is a child dressed up as a ghost from 1905. And you can see that those echoes back to Samhain. You've got images of the wheat in little bundles, you've got the pumpkin in the centre, but you've also got those things such as black cats at the front, and you've got the shape of witches starting to appear and form as part of the Halloween tradition. And again, it's all to do with scaring off spirits and scaring off evil. Please remember that the costumes were to confuse ghosts or to scare off evil spirits. And I have to say, this image haunts me. It's a costume for a child, and I certainly think that should an evil spirit come anywhere near this child, it would disappear very quickly. It's a quite terrifying mask that this little girl's wearing, and it's from about the late 1920s. This is a group of adults in Halloween costumes. Pranking became a very popular tradition, and that started in about the late 19th century. We didn't have trick or treat by this time, but pranking was quite popular. It started, it's believed there are cases of it being mentioned in the UK. However, it's documented quite well in the late 19th century in America and escalating into the 20th century. In the UK, it was things like pinching gates or moving livestock around. In America, children would tie a string around a cabbage and pull it across a field so it looked like a haunted cabbage. Or they would take gates off and let livestock run free. They would make turnips more scary. And this is where this idea, you know, now today, we make our pumpkins very scary. The scarier the better, with their jagged teeth and fierce eyes, and they really are quite horrific. And that started to come about in the early 20th century, when there was this idea to make the turnips and then pumpkins as scary as possible to frighten people. It was pranking. Also, there was a tradition of adults playing pranks on their neighbours, and the fact that they're in costume, they're in disguise, they could blame it on the spirits. So they'd play a prank, say it was the ghost's fault, as if that would absolve them. And the idea of masks and disguise was a way of getting away with anything, really. So it was pranking at the early start of the 20th century. I'm now moving to New Orleans because this is what the essence of the talk is about. My favourite place in the world. So pumpkins were replacing turnips at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, and they're seen everywhere. These are some that have been painted. This is on the entrance to the French market on the edge of the French Quarter in New Orleans. Pumpkin carving, using pumpkins as decorations, painting faces onto pumpkins, they're everywhere. When Halloween starts to come around from about early I've seen them as early as the 2nd or 3rd of October. They start to get ready for Halloween. It's the second biggest celebration after Mardi Gras. So that's the sort of scale it's on. New Orleans is predominantly Catholic. And so with this tradition that All Souls and All Saints Day should be celebrated rather than Samhain or Halloween, the focus in New Orleans at the turn of the century was on All Saints Day, which is the 1st of November. And graves in New Orleans are above ground because the water table's so high, they can't bury down into the ground. So tombs and small graves are all above ground. And the idea was that families should honour their own dead on All Saints Day and then All Souls Day, but All Saints is the 1st of November. And so families would go, and it's still upheld today, but this is an image from about 1890, where you can see flowers are on the graves, beautifully well tended. There's a wreath on the grave to the right. The lady in view is wearing mourning clothes, but it became a celebratory event. People took food and had picnics next to the graves of their lost family members. This is another lithograph showing people getting ready. This is All Souls Day, All Saints Day. These little graves, you can see the little squares, they're for the less well-off people. So the body is just interred into these and then it's bricked up. A bit more macabre, but today there is a lot less space available. And so they're almost on a rented basis. So bodies are put inside, they're left for a year and a day, as is the tradition, and then the bones are taken out and interned in a much smaller space, and then the space can be reused for another funeral. But here you can see people with their flowers, with their offerings. It was a big event and it's still upheld today. It's a tradition, it's an old tradition, but it's still one that's upheld today. This is another postcard, the vaults of Old St. Louis Cemetery on All Saints Day, New Orleans, Louisiana. So again, these vaults, you can see them decorated with flowers. As I said, the vaults now tend to be reused, so there aren't many that are kept within one family. Some have been purchased and used repeatedly for family members, but some are still beautifully decorated year round, but the 1st of November is the day when everybody comes in. Again, this is in St. Louis Cemetery. A few days before All Saints Day, they will paint and whitewash all the tombs so that they're ready for families to come and put the flowers on and any food offerings, and to celebrate and really honour their dead. And these are the more traditional tombs that are built above ground. This is more recent. The picture on the left is the actual tomb of Marie Laveau, who's the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. There is a tomb that everybody goes to saying that it's her tomb, which is very white, and it's got Glapion is the family name that's on it. And you see the 3 crosses. The belief is if you draw 3 crosses, turn around 3 times and make a wish, Marie Laveau will ensure that it's upheld. But her actual tomb is a few little lanes back within the cemetery, and this is her tomb. Then on the right, these are pictures from about 10 years ago, and you've got the clergy going into St. Louis Cemetery and praying on All Saints Day, and you can see at the bottom the vast array of flowers that go into the cemeteries and the celebration of the 1st of November. That tradition I've just mentioned of soul cakes and souling, that's widely used in New Orleans. They make soul cakes every year and hand them out for trick or treat. The ones at the bottom made me smile because they've been made so it looks like there's little bugs in them. They're made from raisins and nuts and sugar and flour. But yeah, the one at the bottom, it looks like there's squished spiders and beetles in them. So it's just to add that little American Halloween twist that we know and love. But they're still part of the tradition. They're given out as part of trick-or-treating. And of course, we have trick-or-treat. Now, trick-or-treating, if you think the guising that we've had a tradition of and dressing up for over 2,000 years is part of trick or treat. Kids dress up. Turnips are now pumpkins, which are carried or left outside. That came from us. The pranking originated with us and then was taken up by America. So it's very difficult for us to actually blame the Americans. I agree, the Americans commercialized it. And if we have any Americans in the audience, which we do tend to, I'm sure we could have a very heated discussion about this. But it's often said that we started it, but the Americans made the money out of it. And however, it is growing here too. And when I tried to find the origins of the term trick or treat, it's quite difficult. The broadest agreement of where it came from is actually from a Peanuts cartoon strip by Charles Schulz. It's the Snoopy and Charlie Brown cartoon strip. And in 1951, he did a seasonal 3-part strip, so Halloween, All Saints and All Souls Day, where Charlie Brown's head was used as the model for a pumpkin carving. And then, without doubt, Disney was going to get involved at some point. And there was a Disney animation in 1952, which was called Trick or Treat, and that was with Donald Duck. So that seems to be the first, so early 50s is when the term trick or treat really filtered into our imagination. Some of the newer traditions in Halloween in New Orleans. I've just talked to you about all of those old traditions that still permeate the streets in New Orleans. And I'm focusing predominantly on the French Quarter because that's where I've done most of my work and that's where I know the people. But these traditions are firmly embedded in Halloween culture. Every year there are seasonal attractions. So every year there are 5 or 6 big attractions that are put up especially for Halloween, for tourists, for locals alike, and they are hugely popular. They terrify me. I would never go inside them. I can't stand, and I know it's ridiculous coming from somebody who spends her life researching curses and ghosts and voodoo and vodou and witchcraft. I am terrified of these places. The one at the top is called the Mortuary. It opens up every year. Clue is in the name. It's just full of people dressed as zombies trying to grab you and terrify you. And then the one at the bottom is the Haunted House, which is a franchise. Sorry, not a franchise. It's a company called Haunted House. This is from, this is the one that should have happened this year. It's their 13th year. Sadly, because of the pandemic, it's not gone ahead. But this year's theme would have been Nightmare. And you can see the sinister pumpkin-headed man and holding a pumpkin. But yeah, these are very popular and they're part of Halloween tradition in New Orleans for tourists and locals. Like I said, not for me. Ghost investigating. Ghost tours in New Orleans are huge business. It's a very, very spiritual city. It's a very, very atmospheric town in the centre, in the Vieux Carré or the French Quarter. It's incredibly atmospheric. And it's actually a law within New Orleans that if you're selling a property and you believe there's a ghost, you have to declare it. So when you see real estate banners outside apartments and properties, it will say not haunted or haunted, which I find quite amusing because if you don't believe in ghosts, it won't make any difference. But yes, it's a legal requirement that you state if there is a ghost in your property. And in the French Quarter, everybody has a ghost story to tell. Everybody has seen a ghost or is aware of a ghost. Yeah, I love it there. I absolutely love it. So ghost tours are big business. This is one that's always on the tour. This is Lafitte's. It's a bar, so there are spirits there naturally, as well as the supernatural ones. It's believed to be the haunt, sorry, I've got to put that pun in, but the haunt of the pirate Jean Lafitte. People have taken photographs inside. It's very dark. It's all very dark wood inside. And people have taken photographs and it's believed to be 2 or 3 spirits that roam around inside. And I mean the ghost ones, not the alcoholic ones. I've never seen anything in there, but it is always on the ghost tours. One of my most favourite places is Muriel's in Jackson Square, which is right in the centre of the French Quarter. And it's a tradition to go ghost hunting at Halloween in New Orleans. People flock to the city for lots of reasons, but one of them being the ghosts. Now, Muriel's has got a long history, which I could talk about on its own, but it's believed to be haunted by several spirits. There was a massive fire in 1788 in New Orleans. It burnt down. There was another one later. And Muriel's, so people were killed during the fire. But Muriel's was taken over. I'm just checking my notes because I want to make sure I get the names right. It was owned by somebody called Julien Poydras in the 1820s, and eventually it was in the hands of Pierre Jourdain. Now, Pierre Jourdain, it was noted that it was believed that he died in a later fire in the 1800s. However, records now show that he was quite a gambling man, and it's believed that he took quite a risk with his restaurant, and it was a hotel as well at the time, and he lost it. And he was absolutely devastated, and his only way out, he felt, was to commit suicide. So he died on the property. When it was bought and reopened in 2001 as Muriel's, lots of staff started to have weird things happen to them. Several said they felt they were being pushed or shoved. Tables would be disturbed, chairs would be knocked over, and it was getting quite aggressive. This ghost was quite aggressive, the one that was downstairs in the restaurant. They had mediums in, and it was believed that it was Pierre Jourdain who was haunting it. He wanted to come back. He loved New Orleans, and he absolutely loved his place. So the decision was made, if he wanted to be there, they would set up a table specifically for Monsieur Jourdain to join a meal. So just in the hallway, in the image to the right, there is permanently a table set up for 3 people. You can book it as a 2, but you have to leave that 3rd seat free. And it's believed that once they did this and people would dine on this table, it's in the hallway rather than in the main restaurant, so it's in a quiet, private area, that Mr. Jourdain would then join the guests who dined at this table or sit on his own, and less activity actually happened in the restaurants. There are also several spirits upstairs. There's a room they call the seance room, where spirits are believed to haunt. Again, I didn't see anything when I was there. I visited Muriel's on a number of occasions, but it is quite interesting to see this table set up for 3, so Monsieur Jourdain can join in your dinner. A ghost tour in New Orleans would not be complete without the Lalaurie mansion, which you can't actually go inside. It's a huge building dating back to around the late 18th century, early 18th century. It's on a whole block in the French Quarter. And I don't know if any of you ever watched the American Horror Story series. They did include this as one of, I think it was The Coven, I think. But yeah, Madame Lalaurie is notorious. Her name was Delphine. She was born in the late 18th century. She died in the 19th century, but she was a cruel, cruel mistress. She had slaves chained in the kitchens, and it's believed, well, it's been documented that she tortured and maimed several people. I'm not going to go into gory detail because it's horrific. It has been embellished over time, so be careful what you read, because as the American Horror Story franchise really did elaborate on what she did. But there's a newspaper article from about 1863 which documents what they found when they found these slaves chained up in the attic. And the only reason she got found out was one of the slaves deliberately set fire to the kitchen. I think it was just desperation. They set fire, people came in, and Madame Lalaurie fled. It's believed that friends of hers managed to get her out. Some people said she went to Haiti. Some people said she stayed in the States. We're not sure. I've not really traced down what happened to her after the event, but it's believed she died in 1863 or 1864. But she was never held to account for the atrocities that she committed in this house. But it is on the haunted tour. You can't go inside it. I've been fortunate to see photographs of the interior. It's a stunning building. It was sold to Nicolas Cage at one point, and I know he never slept a night in there. He couldn't do that. He sold it on after a very short period of time, and it's now owned by a company, but they just have one housekeeper who lives in and one housekeeper who comes in daily. And that's it. That's the only people. They were very, very sheltered about ever giving any information or letting people see inside, but it's relaxed over time, and they do join in the Halloween spirit now. This is one of the doorways to the house, which, as you can see, has been decorated with scary, I think that's supposed to be Madame Lalaurie on the right. You can see a white figure holding chains. And then this do not crime scene, do not cross. So they sort of made a bit of humour out of their atrocious past for this building, but it is a stunning building. Another modern tradition, New Orleans is well known for its parades. They love a parade and they love a party. At Halloween, there are costume balls, there are huge celebrations, parties everywhere. And the crew of Boo, crew spelt with a K as in the Creole spelling, are now responsible for the annual Halloween parade. The crew of Boo originates from, there's a tradition in the 9th Ward and the Treme district, I think it was those areas primarily, that adults would dress up in skeleton costumes and go out very early in the morning and terrorise children to make sure they're behaving. And they may leave treats, so it was a kind of reverse trick or treat. But now the crew of Boo is the organisers of the big parade. This is a parade that's only second to Mardi Gras. It's huge. There are floats, they're throwing beads, they're throwing candies. So huge celebration, and thousands of people come into the French Quarter to watch this. It's hell, it's real hell, but it's well worth seeing at least once. The streets are packed. You can see there are some scantily clad women at the front of this. It's incredibly hot and warm and humid in October. The last time I was there in October, it was about 36 degrees and the humidity was 90% or something crazy. So it's these scanty costumes can be forgiven. You also get to see the first line, and if you look back, you can just at the back see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 horns, and this is from the traditional jazz parades. You've probably seen them in Live or Let Die, where they do a very slow music and then it goes into celebratory. And again, this is about celebrating the life of the dead, not being sad. Tourist souvenirs, obviously, you cannot go to New Orleans without having tourist souvenirs. And alongside the voodoo dolls and the beads, there are thousands of these little skeletons for sale with all different colours hair. So yeah, the tourists are catered for. Beads are always around in New Orleans. You go into any souvenir shop and there are thousands, racks of thousands of every colour. But of course, when Halloween comes around, you get the Halloween examples. So these are mine. I've got the one on the left with the bats and the pumpkins and the ghosts, and of course the black cat and the pumpkin. And you do get beads thrown out as well during the parade. Another tradition that the crew of Boo started, and I think they started this about 6-7 years ago, is the annual zombie run. So they encourage families to dress up as zombies for Halloween. This is one family. They do a mile. I think they now do a 5K fun run as well, but everybody just dresses up as zombies. It's not, I think it's always held on the Saturday closest to Halloween, but it's just a bit of fun in the park where everybody becomes a zombie. Okay, decorations have appeared since the early 20th century, but New Orleans homeowners really do it in style. They take it to another level, embellishing every part of their home with all things Halloween, and I just love it. So I'm now just going to flick through some examples for you. There's not a lot I can say, they just need to be looked at. The only thing I find very creepy are these enormous spiders that crop up everywhere. And there's a giant grey one in the top right hand corner, if you can see it, with very long legs and red eyes, which I don't like. Doorways are embellished, these beautiful garlands. These are the pumpkins. Again, giant spiders you can see at the top of the image. Pumpkins everywhere, skeletons everywhere. They really do love their Halloween. Witches, not so many, interestingly. It's more about the pumpkins and skeletons. I will mention the colours, black and orange. They're traditional Halloween colours. The The black, this again comes from Samhain. The black is from the darkness that is about to fall. So we finished the summer and we're about to go into the long dark nights of winter. And it's believed that the orange comes from the autumn leaves. It's that time of year where the leaves are changing colour. Somebody did mention last week, could it be to do with the bonfires and the flames, which it could very well be. But that's why the colours are black and orange. You do now see purple and green, you do see other colours, but traditional colours for Halloween are orange and black. This is known as the Skeleton House. It's a huge mansion that they put out all these skeletons across their lawn. This is just outside the French Quarter. I think this one was in the Garden District, which is where the big antebellum houses are. Balconies are just covered with this eclectic mix of everything that's Halloweeny. Or they can be a bit more stylish, like this one with white flowers and just a white theme to match the white woodwork. Totally over the top with cobwebs, giant spiders again. I just love the fact they embrace it, and the people I've met, they're probably the least likely people you would think are going to decorate their homes, and yet they just love it. This one has got just crime scene tape all over it and cobwebs. This has got a sort of bride and groom skeletons on the porch. Another balcony scene. Bats and skeletons. Little bit, this, I think this one was in the Garden District, so a little bit more sedate, but you've got the cobwebs and skeletons again, and ghosts and scarecrows. This is in the French Quarter. You can see it's on Bourbon and St Anne. Skeletons again, lots of black and orange. That one's got broomsticks on. I think that's actually near the Voodoo shops. And it wouldn't be New Orleans without me mentioning Voodoo, and they get on board as well. So all the Voodoo practitioners totally embrace it. It's known for Voodoo. And at this time of year, it's a time to remember the dead. So the Voodoo queens are honoured. And this one is believed to be a picture of Marie Laveau, Voodoo queen of New Orleans from the late 19th century. Then we've got Voodoo queens such as Lala, who is, this image is circa 1930s, but I like this one because her black cat's in the top court. You can see the black cat over her head. But all of the dead are honoured at this time. The Voodoo shops in the French Quarter, they sell Voodoo wares, but they also do traditional Voodoo healing and Voodoo readings. So this is Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo in the Quarter. Reverend Zombie's House of Voodoo, these amazing windows with all things creepy, but again tying into the Catholicism and the whole Halloween tradition. And then I'm going to finish with Voodoo Authentica, because they've really embraced the whole Halloween season. And for the last, I think it might be 15 years now, they've arranged to have a street closure in the French Quarter, which is totally unheard of. But on Halloween, the road is shut down, and following those old traditions, they put offerings out, but for people of free food and free drink, and everyone is invited, tourists and locals alike. So the residents are there, tourists are free to go, and it's all from those old traditions. But they put together a day of talks and events. There are very well-known voodooists. These are two I met. This is Papa Jean on the left and Mama Lola on the right. And they were to feature on the Voodoo Fest poster. And the Voodoo Fest posters are now very collectible. They only issue so many per year. I have got one, but it got incredibly rain-soaked one year I was there, but I've clung on to it. But Papa Jean sadly passed away a few years ago. I was fortunate enough to meet him, and he made me so welcome. So I needed to pay a little tribute to them. People sit, they listen, they dress up. There are talks all day. You can see the ladies on the left are in their white clothes because their white is the clothing for Voodoo. You can see Papa Jean and Mama Lola next to them. The lady with the purple headdress is dressed up like Frida Kahlo with the full makeup. And it's just an amazing event. And then as darkness falls on Halloween, the drums and the chanting begin. There is a ceremony that takes place to honour the dead. And it's believed because the dead are roaming amongst us, there are ghosts, the voodooists then celebrate the dead. The veve is drawn for Baron Samedi and the drums play. Baron Samedi is the lower or the voodoo spirit for the dead. He has particular links to magic, to death and to ancestor worship. So he is wholly appropriate for Halloween. I'm just going to show you a very short clip of the part of the ceremony where they're drawing his symbols on the ground to call him up. So let's just play this quickly. That just shows you a little taste. You can see the crowds that are gathering because that's towards the end of Halloween. So in summary, New Orleans is the place to go for Halloween. The origins of Halloween are not lost there. They've been reinterpreted, reappropriated, but the old traditions are still upheld along with the new ones that have come in. New Orleans is a place of voodoo, of ghosts, of trick and treat with a jazz background. It's warm, it's embracing. And as they say in New Orleans, laissez les bons temps rouler, or let the good times roll. Thank you and happy Halloween.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was brilliant. Fantastic. We've got a couple of questions and comments. Melissa asks if the webinar would be uploaded anywhere. She's having some difficulty with low internet quality and she's missed some of what is being said or shown. So just to say to everybody that we will be uploading it to University Centre Telford YouTube channel, and also Claire Buckerfield from the university has just uploaded all our videos to the University of Wolverhampton YouTube channel as well. So you'll be able to see all Louise's lectures there. So that's available for everybody. John says, hello, another interesting lecture, thank you. You mentioned it started as a Celtic festival, mentioning the Scots and Irish. Did the Welsh not believe in it?
Yes, they did, but those traditions, the Samhain traditions that I talked about, they seem to be more documented to kind of swathe across Scotland, Ireland, and I think that's, and most of those traditions went with the Scots, especially the Irish, when they then went to America. So that's why I focused on that. I do believe that the Welsh did follow the Samhain festival because most of the UK did, and it was only with Christianity that it slightly changed. But even then, it just added 2 extra days onto the holiday, as far as I can see.
Okay, thank you. Kate says, do you carve a pumpkin or a tumpshy turnip?
Pumpkin. I'm sorry, I just find it easier, if I'm honest. It's easier to carve a pumpkin, and they have more impact. They seem to have a much more visual impact than the turnips.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Katie just says she wanted to say a massive thank you. That was amazing.
Thanks, Katie.
Lots of good feedback. Pamela, was the history of Halloween talk just for uni students, or was that public too?
That was a public talk. It was for the University Centre in Stafford. And I believe that will be online as well. That will be on a YouTube channel, so it should be available. I gave that on the 19th of October. So that was purely on the history, traditions and superstitions.
Okay, thank you. Is children's Halloween, this is a question from John, is children's Halloween in the US a lot more PG than in the UK, more fancy dress than horror?
Yeah, I think it's just the nature of it, because it's become so commodified and commercialized. It's found its way into cartoons, into I think there is nothing that is not fair game with children when it comes to Halloween in the US. There is that horror element. I mean, if you look at those early costumes, parents dress the children to be as terrifying as possible to scare the evil spirits away, and I think they succeeded. That one in particular terrifies me, with that child like with an evil pumpkin head on. But I think over time it's been sanitized, as many things are, and I think it's more, a little escape is needed. I mean, if you didn't see my Halloween talk, it became very sinister in the US in the 1930s, and crime was associated with Halloween for a time, and they almost banned it. It came close to them banning the festival of Halloween because it became so violent and so sinister. So I think that might have also, it was at that time that communities came together. There were community centres, churches, neighbourhoods came together to give the children a safe place to do their trick-or-treating and to have sweets. So it was in the 1930s really that it switched from the sinister dark stuff to the more friendly and child-centred focus, because of what was happening across the States in the 1930s.
Okay, thank you. And from Becky, are there any other places in the US that celebrate Halloween, Samhain, like they do in New Orleans, or are they unique? And she says she can't imagine her own town in Kent doing all that.
No, what's lovely is I'm finding that increasingly the folklore traditions around Samhain are starting to bubble up again. And as people become more educated about where it came from and the fact it's not some horrific, pagan, tortuous, sacrificial festival, that it's actually quite benign, people are engaging with the folkloric history of it. So maybe your town in Kent will come to do it at some point. But there are other places in the US. It didn't originate in New Orleans. I think it was Wisconsin and maybe Connecticut originally. New York does it in style. But New Orleans, the French Quarter, is quite unique because it's so concentrated with small roads and streets. So it just lends itself. And New Orleans is such a unique place. It's just, they do it particularly well.
Okay, thank you. Similar question from Jennifer, who says, first of all, a fascinating lecture, Louise, and then she asks about other American cities and whether they take it as seriously, or is it all linked to Catholicism and Voodoo, and elsewhere is it just fun?
I think other cities do take it seriously, and there are other, I mean, if you think of Mexico, I'm going slightly out of the US, but Mexican Day of the Dead is huge, Dias de Muerte, and they have picnics next to the graves. They really do celebrate the 1st and 2nd of November, and the 31st of October is really just the eve before All Saints Day. So there are lots of places that do take it seriously. Where there's a strong Catholic element, you find that All Saints Day tends to be more prolific. Voodoo just happens to be there because New Orleans Voodoo is in the very breath of New Orleans. So that's why they get involved.
Okay, thank you. Deb Curitan says, thank you, another fascinating lecture, and she's learnt lots about Halloween. As a child, she carved turnips and didn't realise that this came from Celtic traditions.
Yeah, neither did I till I was much older. And I gave the talk last week, and so many teachers said to me, we ought to tell children about this and where it came from.
Kyle says, do you know the reasoning behind the honorific Papa and Mama, as these titles feel familial rather than addressing a spiritual superior?
They are more familial. Especially, I mean, I could talk about Voodoo for hours, but in Haitian Voodoo, it's very matriarchal. There's a lot, and it's just a term. I mean, you know, it's a mambo and a hungan are the actual terms, but I found in New Orleans and across America, they tend to use mama and papa as the head of the family, if you like. It's that kind of feeling that they're the head of the family when it comes to the voodoo.
Okay, and Kate says, have you written books on your subjects, or are you likely to, as it's so fascinating?
The answer is yes. I've had articles. There's an article that's just coming out in Inquiring Eye, which you can get from the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, and that's about the haunted and cursed dolls I talked about last night. I am finishing off a book on curses. It's called A Cabinet of Curses, Puppets, Pins and Power, because there's not much out there on this. So that, fingers crossed, will be published early in 2021. Obviously, everything went on hold with this year. But yes, I'm working hard on a number of publications at the moment, and hopefully they will all come out early next year.
Fantastic, thank you. Kyle says, is it difficult to acquire the early images of Halloween, and do many physical artifacts still exist, for example, costumes?
There are, yes, it is difficult. There are some great photographic collections of these early photographs in archives around the US. Most of mine came from the Louisiana archives. There are some physical artifacts, but especially in the US, one of the traditions in early trick-or-treating was families were poor, so they'd knock the door and people would tear up sheets and give them just little pieces of white sheet that the children could put over their heads so they could be ghosts. So those kind of things are never going to survive. It's really only, I think it's as we got on to the sort of 50s and 60s that people started to actually sell and realise there was a big money to be made in trick-or-treating and costumes.
Okay, thank you. Pamela said she thinks the 1950s Donald Duck trick-or-treat cartoon that you mentioned has been remastered and is now available on Disney Plus because she watched it quite recently.
Oh, that would be great. I know it's 1952 it was made, and I've only seen stills from it, so I will have a look, because it's just called Trick or Treat and it's good old Donald Duck. So thank you, Pamela. I'll have another look for that one.
Okay. Another comment. Thank you for a fascinating talk. You mentioned you're interested in ghosts. Do you give a talk on local ghost stories?
I haven't, but I have got lots of them. It's another, that's more, rather than my academic interest, it tends to be my personal interest. And I do collect local ghost stories, and I don't call it ghost hunting because I was corrected by my very young niece, who's my likes to be my assistant. She's nearly 9, and she told me it's ghost friending. I shouldn't call it ghost hunting, it's ghost friending. So thank you, Imogen, for that one. But yes, I am fascinated by paranormal investigations. I personally have not seen a ghost in front of me. I've not seen an apparition. I've had things happen that I can't explain. I'm not scared of that kind of thing, but perhaps local ghost stories will be a future talk.
Sounds good, Louise.
There's another one.
There's another one. Thank you. Cos says, thank you for another great lecture. My partner and I are planning a trip to New Orleans for Halloween once the craziness is over, and this has given me a great list of places to start with.
Oh, definitely. I should write a guidebook on New Orleans, but do go to Muriel's and go and see. They will let you go upstairs and see the haunted rooms, so do ask. They're not open as such, but if you ask, they'll let you go in, which is great, and to see that little table with the 3 seats. But do go to the Voodoo Museum, do just walk the streets. It's an amazing place.
Brilliant, thank you. Maximilian says, is there a specific reason or meaning behind spiders at Halloween except for the scare factor?
The only thing I ever thought about was the Jamaican tradition of Anansi, where there's this storytelling and a spider features quite prominently in that. But I haven't found anything that directly links, and I do think it's purely the scare factor. What's scarier than a 5 or 6 foot spider climbing up the side of your house?
Yeah, very scary. Ben says, does masking and costumes, or do masking and costumes have connections to New Orleans traditions during Carnival?
Well, Carnival is huge, and it's kind of the other way around. It's one of those things that, you know, as I said, the whole thing about putting costumes on goes back thousands of years. More recently, probably over 100 years, but New Orleans really pushed the boundaries when it comes to costumes. And there's Mardi Gras World in New Orleans, where you can go and see the floats and some of the costumes, and they're phenomenal, the amount of work that goes in. And like I said, they prepare months in advance for the Halloween carnival.
Okay, thank you. And I think you've really answered Diana's question. She's just asking for any specific places that you would recommend.
I would definitely take a trip out to the plantation houses. Go to Oak Alley. It's probably the most famous one, with the big avenue with the trees coming over. Whitney Plantation is great because they're actually focusing on the slaves rather than the wealthy white owners, and that's only recently been opened. So Whitney Plantation, definitely. Within the French Quarter, go to the Voodoo Museum, go and have a look at the shops, eat at Muriel's with the ghosts. But as I said before, just, you know, walk the streets of New Orleans, because it's just, go and sit by the Mississippi. It's just, jazz is coming at you from everywhere. It's an incredible place.
Sounds amazing. Piers says, thanks for another fascinating talk. I can't imagine Halloween in New Orleans being so hot and humid when it's traditionally so cold here.
Neither could I, Piers, till I went in 2018. It didn't. They said, oh, it's going to be very wet. It'll be these torrential storms they get. Not one. It was 36 degrees plus, and it was humid. It was ridiculously hot. And then I came back to about 3 degrees here.
And with all those people as well, and that humidity.
It's oppressive. You can feel it, you know. But there's a lovely park in Jackson Square where you can just escape.
Sounds good. That's all the questions for now. I don't know if anybody else has got any more, or if that's it. There were 23 there. So, another one. Do they celebrate Christmas to the same extent as Halloween?
No, interestingly, the biggest festival is Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. That's huge. And I wouldn't recommend, everyone says, oh, you've got to go for that. And I would say, no, you haven't. It's horrendous. You can't move. There's a lot of crime. Well, not even with the crime. It's just the vast volume of people squashed into very tight streets, and you can't move. I've been to the Easter one, the Easter parade. That's quite unique as well, because you've got the very wealthy owners coming on carriages like they would have done centuries ago, throwing things to the poor children. You know, it's beggars belief really. But so I've seen that one. Mardi Gras is the biggest, Halloween is the next. They do celebrate Christmas, but not to the extent of Halloween.
And what would the temperatures be like for Mardi Gras?
Mardi Gras is quite pleasant. It's about 20, 25. It's been 25 when I've been there, but like our summer, but not so humid.
Yeah, that sounds more comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, October shouldn't be as hot as it was. It just happened to be when I was there. It's usually about 26 and with showers.
Okay, I think that's everybody's questions have been answered, Louise, so thank you very much. Lots of really positive feedback as usual. So it just remains to say thank you very much, Louise, for another amazing lecture. So much to learn.
Somebody's just come in. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Yes, just another one saying thank you very much.
And I did see the comment about the 6-foot slug, and yes, that would be scarier than a 6-foot slug.
Yes, I saw that, and then it seemed to disappear. I don't know if I pressed on the wrong button. And Becky says, thanks again and happy Halloween, everybody.
Thanks to everybody for listening, and happy Halloween to everyone. And remember, the spirits are among you on Saturday.
Thanks very much, everybody, for attending. Is that another one just come through? Yes.
Just on the personal fear of slugs.
Yes.
Thanks, Kyle.
Okay.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thanks everyone for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.